Psychology Rose, and today we're going to be talking about metaskills, indirectness, and power, on how where metaskills are missing, indirectness is unaddressed, and power unchallenged. This was inspired by a conversation that the wonderful Raymond and Mr. Barnes were having about what Raymond calls psychopolitics, and he's going to be talking, he talks a lot about the information bomb, he talks a lot about how really, politics today controls us on a psychological level. We're psychologically oriented to do certain things. He'll talk about the current events, the medical apparatus, all of these different things, where it really feels like politics today is very, very psychological. And I was listening to this and also thinking about some of the work being done on metamodernity and the need for thinking in new ways, in meta ways, and these kind of streams of thought came together to think about metaskills and its relation to power. A metaskill is, say, the ability to think about or consider the background of a conversation. So, for example, if someone comes up to you and starts talking about the weather, you're able to see that the person is talking about the weather because they are trying to avoid something or because they feel anxious and they're trying to change their mind. Maybe it's the financial situation, the geopolitical situation, and they're talking about the weather to avoid that. Now, the words, the discussion about the weather never tells you directly that it's a way to avoid the anxiety of the world today. But someone who has a metaskill, who is skilled in that area, would be able to see what the foreground is hiding. Without metaskills, there's no ability to tell the difference between the foreground and the background. Everything becomes foreground per se. Everything becomes surface. There's everything that is direct is all there is. What a person directly says is what they said. There's nothing else going on. Likewise, if a person stares at you, glances across the room and stares at you, the ability to know that they're staring at you because you're supposed to have cleaned the kitchen and you haven't yet, that right there is a meta-analysis. You've been able to kind of look beyond, see what the stare means that's not said by the stare directly per se, and identify what it's getting at. Metaskill is an umbrella term here. We have a talk on metatalks, which is the ability to talk about structures of conversation, how people interpret things, hermeneutics, and Michelle and I talked about that in the context of relationships and how important metatalks are. And metatalk would be a metaskill. Meta-analysis, the ability in economics to figure out how certain modeling changes the results, or how to model modeling. All of these different things would constitute metaskills, or the ability to handle and avoid metamentality, as discussed in the paper Metamentality in the Metamodern Age. All of that would be metaskills, and someone who is metaskillfull is someone who is able to think about methods of interpretation, think about conversation structures, think about what's going on in the background, all of these different things. Another way to look at this is, I bring it up all the time, Heidegger talks about how you don't notice a doorknob until it's broken. It's invisible until then. To be metaskillfull is to be able to see invisible things, to not forget about invisible things. A lot of the stuff we have to be meta about are things that have this natural tendency to fade from focus, to fade from thought, things that we're naturally kind of forgetful about. And to be metaskillfull is to not let that occur. So again, metaskill is going to be able to handle background, to not forget background, to know what's going on behind people's words, behind people's actions, and things like that. Now, what's really important is that if we're not metaskilled, we're not going to have any skill to handle direct and to challenge power. Power in this piece is going to be defined as distinct from force. Force is when I say push you into a room, I push against you, where power is where I look at you and you go and walk into the room. Power is very indirect. Power does not, it's non-physical per se. It doesn't have my body pressing up against yours. Force would say be where a guy holds a gun to your head and says, give me all the money, whereas power would be where you willingly hand the money over to the person for some reason. So power, and I think it's really important to make this distinction between power and force because it helps bring out why metaskills are so important. Power and force are used as similes all the time, in the same way that love and like are used as similes, which is a problem. And if that's going on in our thinking, well, then it's not going to be clear why metaskills are so important. But if, in fact, power has a lot to do with the non-physical, with indirect, with background, with soft power, as discussed regarding governments, or with influence, say with corporations or algorithms or all these different things. Well, then it's not going to be clear why metaskills are important. But if we really understand that power is constantly in operation all around us all the time, then metaskills are really, really important, or otherwise we're going to be defenseless to power. Now, a few things. That doesn't mean power is always bad. There's arguably power dynamics in a friendship, in a relationship. You can use power dynamics to empower people. I could look at the person to go into the next room precisely because when they go in there, they're going to avoid a conflict that I might have with someone else in the room that if they were to experience would psychologically throw them off for a few weeks or something like that. I can use power to make people do things that are going to make them happy, say in a relationship. And also power, without power there'd be no empowerment. So the power dynamic in friendships, relationships, in corporations. Corporations could use marketing to get people to turn to alternative energy, which would be good for the environment. Corporations could use power and marketing to let people know about certain technologies that, if they had, would actually make their lives better. They could use it to let them know about certain entertainment opportunities that people would enjoy. And so power, we have to be careful to assume that power is always bad. However, power, if it's not trained or it's not channeled or it's not challenged, then it's all going to be random. Expressions of power are going to be random. When they're good, when they're bad will be random. And a society lacking in meta skill is a society where the expressions of power will be random. And it's only simply probable then that most people will get hurt or a lot of people will get hurt. It becomes like a lightning storm where the lightning's just striking here and there. Who knows where it's going to strike? It's all random. And I fear that because we don't have a good distinction between power and force, we don't appreciate the need for metaskill. And where there is a lack of metaskill, then expressions of power are random, and in fact, people do get hurt. It's also important to note that as technology has advanced, as military weaponry, all these things have gotten stronger, there has been a movement of the social order away from force toward power. And this gets into like algorithms, computers, the ways they're influencing us, using our data, different things like that. Raymond has this great phrase called psychopolitics, where he talks about how politics is so psychological today. We can certainly see a movement of governments, corporations, and people in general away from force to power, as it's being so defined here. I think also if we understand this distinction, then a book like Mr. Pinkert's Our Better Angels, where he talks about the decline of violence, there's been a decline of violence through time. Well, maybe there's been a decline of force. I'm not saying that thesis is necessarily true, but even if there's been a decline of force and direct bloodshed, it would not follow that there hasn't been an increase of power, which might be worse in some ways. It certainly is more psychological and existential, and it also, the other thing that happens is where givens fall apart, which, and this is discussed throughout belonging again, that seems to unleash power. Givens seem to have controlled societal givens, the sort of ways that a society is organized that you don't even have to think about. Say if it's a Christian society, everyone goes to church on Sunday morning. You don't even think about it. It's not because you're stupid, but because it's just given. It's what you do. Well, where givens are lacking, it might be the case that power is unleashed because givens channeled power. They directed the power of people that they had to go to church. And then in church, they would use it toward humanitarian ends. They would use their power to do Christian things, which maybe are good, maybe are bad. It depends. But where it is no longer given that you should use your power in that way, it again becomes like a lightning storm. It doesn't mean the power is going to necessarily be used for bad, but it might be more random. So a movement of society from force to power over time is going to be much more psychological, much more existential, much more random in the expressions of power, and there can be and this will probably prove to be very, very bad unless we as a society learn metaskills and become masterful. We really have to become masterful in metaskills to really note, to avoid, and to operate successfully according to all of this unleashed power today that is everywhere. There's a lot less force, arguably, and obviously this is a generalization. It depends on what parts of the world you're describing. But generally speaking, power is something that we can only live with and channel if we are meta-skillful, and thus we need to become metaskillfull today. For more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Anchor, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. Please subscribe to the email you can find on the website. We'll take you to Substack. And thank you so much for your time.